Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for braving the summer heat and joining us here at the New America Foundation. I especially want to welcome our C-SPAN audience. C-SPAN's recording our event today. I think it's an important topic for a broader American audience to engage in, and I think by the end of the session, I think you will as well. My name is Patrick Doherty. I help run the National Security Studies program here. I run the grand strategy initiative called the Smart Strategy Initiative here at the New America Foundation. And, National Security Studies here at New America does what we think few other programs do. That is to bring new streams of timely, accurate, and integrated data analysis to the big strategic questions facing the United States. We're focused, as I am, on grand strategy, but also critical regions, South Asia, Middle East, and then a critical issue that needs a lot more data analysis, discussion, deliberation, counterterrorism space. We're really blessed with two great counterterrorism researchers, Steve Carle and Peter Bergen, on our staff, and we've got an extraordinary team here, and this event is coming out of that space and that desire for more debate, more discussion in the United States about the nature of the threat and our responses to it. And so it's on that theme that we're especially glad to have Glenn Carle, author of the new book, The Interrogator and Education. I think it's available outside and on good independent booksellers around the country. Put in the plug. In The Interrogator, Glenn affords us the opportunity to see inside the intelligence machine in those troubling early years right after the attacks on 9/11. Well, I'll let Glenn tell his story. A quick scan of the headlines in counterterrorism today show that it is questionable as to how much we have learned the hard lessons that Glenn and his colleagues in the intelligence community lived on a day-to-day basis. Today we see reports of secret interrogation facilities in Somalia, detainees held for months aboard naval vessels in international waters before releasing their prisoners into the judicial system. And of course, the Guantanamo and Bagram facilities are still open for business. What is important about Glenn's book, however, is the insight into the bureaucratic impacts of the decisions taken by the president and vice president to take the gloves off. Glenn not only talks about the flaws in the intelligence case built up around his detainee, but how the system failed to stand up for our basic principles in the face of concerted civilian political leadership. These are but a few of the important lessons that we can take away from Glenn's compelling new book. So let me introduce him briefly so he can tell you himself. So Glenn Carle logged 33 years of service at the C.I.A., and he's cut of the old school mold, cloth, with a bachelor's degree from Harvard and a master's degree from C.I.A. at Johns Hopkins. He cut his teeth on the Sandinistas, but spent most of his career working in counterterrorism, as he was doing from 1997 to 2001 in Afghanistan, when he was rapidly reassigned to the interrogation of a high-value detainee, which is the subject of this book. Glenn would go on from that experience and ultimately cap out his career as the deputy National Intelligence Officer for transnational threats at the National Intelligence Council, which is the pinnacle of our national intelligence community. And with that, please help me welcome Glenn to the podium. I'll take my copy.
Good afternoon. Well into my involvement in the interrogation of an al-Qaeda detainee, whom I call in the book captus. I'm not allowed to name him, so I chose the word that means prisoner in Latin. Weeks into my involvement, he and I were sent to the CIA's most severe interrogation facility, what I call Hotel California, but what numbers of you, if you read the book, will probably give another name, which is the name that it had actually in the agency and to the public now. And I found myself, or found us, really in a moonscape with no trees and rocks and desolate horizon that was uneven and hilly all around inside the facility. And the goal there in the interrogation, of the interrogation procedures, is to psychologically dislocate a detainee. That's the theory behind the program that I became involved in. And that means that you alter one's perceptions. Now, it seems, I'll mention something that sounds quite foolish at first thought, but assumptions, if we can become conscious of them, are quite relevant to the interrogation approach that we took, that the United States took, the CIA. We all know and assume without thinking that gravity pulls us down and that the sky is up, the sky is blue, the sun rises in the east. It does so every day, invariably. We tend to sleep once a day for a set period of time. We have a regular series of meals. Sound is at certain levels and means things that we interpret consciously and unconsciously. That's how we perceive the world. That's how we have a sense of ourselves. And that's how we then have rational thoughts and interact with the environment. Psychologically dislocating someone is designed to change all of that so that you don't know not only where you are or what's going on, but who you are. You lose your sense of self. You become detached from your body, from your senses. It's astounding, and it's shockingly rapid that one can have this happen. I had it happen to me in my training. The reason it happened to me, and it was a relevant, useful part of my training, is the fear or the concern that a CIA officer or an American official might be kidnapped or captured and then interrogated and tortured. So there are methods of coping with these psychological dislocations that occur that can help you survive. And that's what we were trained in. That's very useful. In a strange transmogrification, the approaches that we were taught to cope with were then presented to the United States government, the CIA, and the military as successful measures, means of extracting information. The origins of these measures were two. Some of us are old enough to remember, and all of us probably have studied at least, the scandal, supposed scandal during the Korean War, that our GIs who were captured often signed confessions. How could these patriotic Americans do this? This was where they were traitors. This was wrong. What happened? The methods used were the methods that psychologically dislocate a detainee, and so we studied them and copied them. Those measures were based upon the measures of the NKVD, the Soviet intelligence service, during the show trials against Jewish dissidents, not even dissidents, but Jewish intellectuals in the 1930s. And they also signed confessions before being executed. So those are the measures. And I found myself, having just come out of this environment where there was noise of all different sorts to make it hard to think or just to alter your sense of perception. And the temperature would vary randomly, but quite consciously, as a way to manipulate someone's sense of self and well-being or not. And there would be light or darkness, often total darkness. Diets changed, your sleep has changed, and so on. And then there are some physical measures that I simply refused ever to have anything to do, which I'll talk about in a moment, that you all know about. Although the most famous one of all, I will say, waterboarding, I literally had never heard of, didn't know the term, didn't know what it was until it became a public issue several years later. I'm speaking about 2002 when I was involved. So I just finished an interrogation session, and I walked out of this facility, and I stood at a window looking at this desolate surroundings, alone for a moment, and I thought, well, when the post-interrogation meeting had ended, because we would meet with officers to see how things had gone and what we should do next, whether we should raise the temperature or lower it, change the noise, make babies cry louder or mothers scream softer, and all the soundtrack. I walked out and I stood alone by a window, staring out into the dim and fading light. I still had to drive back to the compound where we all slept and worked, and I wanted to get back if at all possible before dark. I had many hours of work back at the station, writing cables, intelligence reports, taking care of administrative details. Nothing moved that I could see. The landscape was barren under low clouds. What had I become? I thought. What had my country become? Had this landscape always been so bleak? A colleague approached me after I had gazed out the window a couple of minutes, my hands in my jacket pockets and my collar pulled up against the chill. It was really freezing there. "What are you looking at?" he said. "I'm Diogenes," I said slowly, at first not turning. Then I half smiled and glanced at the officer over my shoulder. "You got a light?" "Huh? What?" "Nothing. We got to get out of here. Let's roll," I said. So I found myself in this series of circumstances that made me question deeply enough to write this book and to stand before you today what my government was doing to ourselves, much less the detainee who might well be someone trying to kill us. Well, one thing that it did to me certainly was isolate me. But I want to stress that I'm really a everyman in the book that I write. It's a personal story. Each event I write happened to me, and I describe my sentiments and perceptions as I had them. But what makes it relevant is that were any of you in my shoes, I'm confident you would have experienced the same evolution of thinking and wrestling with issues. It's relevant to us, not because it's a tale of daring do by a CIA officer, but because it's the story of an American citizen troubled by what he was assigned to do and struggling to do it honorably and to grasp the consequences of what he was involved in and to do something about it if possible. So I became isolated progressively in this and angry and alone. I was left, essentially I was at odds with the program, my colleagues, and my institution and my government. And what does one do about that? And that's what I explore in the book. And this circumstance is well illustrated, I think, by my arrival in the country where this interrogation facility was located. It was, as I say, the fall of 2002, so it was quite dangerous there. And the detainee and I had just been sent in a second rendition to this facility. We're being sent to it to increase the pressure on him, to make sure that he shared everything he knew by using these techniques that were surefire. So the plane landed, and quickly a perimeter of, I'll call them soldiers, they were not soldiers, but they were security people, established themselves around the plane, which was reassuring, so that certainly. It was a dangerous environment, and in great haste, they started to unload the plane of everything, including my detainee. And I stood to the side for a moment. And the whole point of the trip is to get the detainee and his interrogator to the facility. And began, or, well, it had begun long before, the circumstances of combined efficiency and lunacy that I lived for weeks. So the detainee was put into one of the vehicles, and the perimeter collapsed. The security did its thing, and they started to drive away, and the plane started to take off. And I was standing literally in the fog saying, well, stop. You don't leave me alone on the runway here. And I did manage to catch the attention of one of the security people before they literally disappeared into the fog and hustle into one of the vehicles, and both of us managed to get to the facility. But this hurried chaos and efficiency and senselessness, I think, is well captured by literally my arrival in this country that you will all know. So it's not a tale of daring do, though, although you have security people and weapons and planes landing and combat conditions and a detainee and interrogation and enhanced interrogation techniques. All of that is true. But I didn't write this story to tell that tale. The point of the story is, what have we done to ourselves, and how did we come to be there? And more importantly still, what can we do about it? Well, it started for me in the fall of 2002, about 10 weeks before the airport runway incident. And my boss came back to my office, which was highly unusual. And he literally poked his head around the corner and said, can you go on a business trip tomorrow? It's important for the CIA, it's important for the country, and it's important for you. And I'll initially send you for 30 days. It could well be 90. And the 30 to 90-day deployments are routine for what we call a surge, an unusual high-profile or pressure, time-sensitive assignment for the agency officers. So I had to clear it with my wife, of course, but who actually was struggling with some serious health challenges. And she said, "Listen, put the way that it was described. Of course you go, and I will cope." So I told my superior I could go, and he sent me to the other side of the building, to the Counterterrorism Center, and said, "You'll be briefed on what it is you're going to be doing for the next several months." And I found the fellow, and he said, "We've captured one of the top half dozen or so, I can't name him, you may work out who it is, members of Al-Qaeda. And we think that he could well lead us to Osama bin Laden, and at the least, he can help us seriously damage Al-Qaeda as an institution. And we want you to be involved in the interrogation, because I had relevant language skills. I was a senior operations officer with years of field experience, and I was available. And those three things were the critical criteria. So this is the man we have. And then he said, we were standing in a hallway talking, actually. And he said verbatim to me, literally said, "You will do whatever it takes to get him to talk. Do you understand?" And I understood immediately, but I didn't want to, I was just shocked, and I wouldn't want to use the word torture. It was inconceivable to use the word. I was embarrassed, and it just seemed not possible. So I said, "We don't do that." And he responded, "We do now." And I thought, well, clearly, right away, I just knew from the first second of my involvement that this was one of the critical moments in my career, and I thought one of the critical issues and moments in the history of the CIA and of the U.S. government since World War II, I would say. I mean, this is a big deal and quite apparent immediately to me. So I thought, well, we are at war. We would need at least a presidential finding to do that, which is a direct presidential order and authorization to the CIA to conduct a certain specific action. It's the president finds that X is in the national security interest. That's the term of art, a finding. So we need direct presidential order, I said. And my colleague said, "Well, we have it." And I thought, well, okay, the rules have changed clearly. Everything seems to be in order. I'd just been told that the president had directly approved, authorized, and ordered the operation and that I was being brought into. And I thought, oh gosh. And I said, well, and I knew where I was going, and the country had a different reputation for its legal system and how it treated people than the United States. So I said, well, suppose something happens that I consider unacceptable. And I hesitated just like that. And he became a little irritated with me now, because here he was briefing me and had informed me that the president and the attorney general and the Department of Justice and the director of the CIA and the director of the Counterterrorism Center, et cetera, all had formally authorized, approved, and ordered what I was being brought in to do. And I, on the other side, the equivalent, roughly speaking, of a lieutenant colonel, having been briefed for 90 seconds, was raising questions. So he had done everything correctly, and I was being obstreperous right, instantaneously. So he was a little irritated, and he said, well, then what you do is you walk out of the room, and if something happens, you won't have seen it, so nothing will have happened, will it? I thought, holy smoke. And then I thought of all times in my career, and this is the first chapter of the book I'm skimming, really, outlining. Of all times in my career, this is the time to be difficult. I use a different term in the book, and not to just go along. And I said, well, what about the Geneva Convention? Now, CIA officers, except for the legal staff, our job is not to worry about the law. Our job is to follow orders which have been determined to be legal. And he had briefed me, as I described. So it was an insolent question, frankly, and he became more irritated, and he said, well, which flag do you serve? And I thought, oh boy, there's no percentage in continuing the conversation, and it's clear what the story is, and I had no standing, not knowing the case well, and having been involved for a couple of minutes. And in the agency, if you are invested in a case and you know its ins and outs, complicated areas and clear points, then you have some influence and some say, which is reasonable. And I didn't yet. And I had been told that everything was in order. So I said, okay. And he said, well, you talk to Mary and Jane or Francine and Josephine, two women's names I don't recall, and they'll handle your logistical needs and get you out tomorrow. Well, it took me 2 days to go. I couldn't get out faster, but 2 days later, off I flew for what became almost 3 months of involvement. And the issues were quite clear from the first second to me that at some point, I recall distinctly thinking, at some point I might have to say, no, I won't do this. This is wrong. But what do I do then? Does walking away achieve anything? How do I obey my orders, act properly, morally even, and accomplish my mission when it seems that there are contradictions and challenges in them? Well, so then I entered this world, as I say, a combination of efficiency and lunacy, and became Franz Kafka for a couple of months. The methods were clearly legally complicated or challengeable from the beginning. There was the Convention Against Torture, the Geneva Convention, C.I.A.'s Executive Order 12333, which I can't cite verbatim, but all of these things are quite clear about what, and habeas corpus, and our Constitution. And on the other hand, direct presidential order approved by, written by the Department of Justice saying, here are the following things that you are ordered to do. They are legal because we followed every procedure, and this is what the law now says, which I thought instantaneously were in conflict. I eventually saw the memorandum or the finding. It wasn't a finding. It was John Yu's memorandum from July 2002, I believe, that came to be called the torture memo, which essentially said whatever the president orders you to do is legal and so you can do it, which I just thought was astounding. And it was clear to colleagues of mine and to me in reading this, frankly, that it was a bit of hack work, sincere or not. It really had... It didn't follow in the 800 years of heritage that I think we all try to embody and live by and advance from the Magna Carta to today. It was apparent to me and to many others. So then I was involved in trying to interrogate this fellow, and I started to find, one, essentially we had, and this is an ascending arc of dismay. At first I thought, well, it's bad enough. I think we essentially have the wrong guy. Now, we had the man we wanted. We didn't literally get the wrong individual, which has happened, but not for me. But our assessment of him, which I found overwhelmingly persuasive. I know my colleagues, and I know their talent, and I know how hard they work, and I saw the body of work and the assessment on this man. For years, we had been following this man, and the case was strong, that he was what he was presented as a senior involved person in or with Al-Qaeda who could do the things that had led us to render him, help us find the things. But I found that this wasn't true. I found fundamentally he was answering my questions, not entirely accurately all the time, but fundamentally I assessed him to be speaking the truth and responsive to me. More importantly, being cooperative he might be a cooperative member of Al-Qaeda. That doesn't mean anything. More importantly, I found that his answers, as I assessed them, and my assessment of him, because I was sitting with him 12 or 15 hours a day, 3 feet away, looking into his eyes and assessing the man. And I was the first one who had had the chance to do that, whereas all of our assessments had been from 12,000 miles removed. I assessed him to be fundamentally telling the truth and not what we had assessed him to be, not a jihadist, not ideologically, theologically similar to or identifying with the views of Al-Qaeda. I found him to be quite different from an American, but not a jihadist, and to be forthcoming, and not even intentionally, willingly complicit, with some exceptions. He wasn't Simon Pure, but I can't go into all the details, but fundamentally not what we had said. And then nothing essentially went right. Now, the fact that things go wrong, and I'll illustrate, is immaterial, but they become representative of what we were doing in the operation and our misunderstanding, I think, of the larger threat that we were trying to parry and have quite successfully. And I'm no Pollyanna. There's a real threat. I asked the fellow a question after several weeks, I think it was, and I said, "Can you answer X, Y, or Z?" And he said, "Well, yes, I can. You just show me the documents that I had with me when you kidnapped me, and then I can provide the answer." I didn't know we had any documents. And I thought, well, it would be nice if the interrogator knew more about the interrogation than the detainee. But I tried to keep a poker face and then exploded, to my colleagues about the foolishness. And so I thought, okay, well, I can fix this. I'll just instruct. I'm the head of the interrogation team right now, and so I'll instruct that these documents be sent to the interrogator. And I was told, thank you for your request. We'll be able to pouch them to headquarters, which was 6,000 miles from where I was, and they'll arrive in 6 to 8 weeks at headquarters. So I tried to explain that I wasn't at headquarters and that I needed them, and was told the same thing. And so then I thought, okay, well, I will send one of my staff, one of my team, to get them, and I couldn't do that. And I thought I would send another one, and I was unable to do that because that person was pulled away. And then I thought, well, I will go myself around the world, get these things, and come back. But if I did that, the interrogation would grind to a halt, and we were dealing with a foreign intelligence service. And so without me, I couldn't do it. I could not leave where I was. So over 10 weeks, I was never able to obtain the documents that I needed for the interrogation, which was just absurd. And of course, the detainee became progressively disdainful of me or of us, because he thought, of course you're doing this on purpose to me, just to harass me, when in fact we were just unable to get the documents to the hemisphere where I was interrogating the man. When I was sent around the world to the second detention facility that I mentioned the first time, I did the correct thing, and immediately upon arrival, I telegrammed with a formal request that the documents be sent to the interrogator so that he could conduct the interrogation effectively. And I did this really to amuse myself, because I knew what the answer would be. And 3 days later, the answer came from the station where they were, saying, "Thank you for your request. Happy to comply. We will be pouching the documents to headquarters, and they should arrive in 6 to 8 weeks." But that was 12,000 miles away still. So I never succeeded, and I thought it became symptomatic and representative of the wheel spinning that we did to a man who fundamentally was not what we had assessed him to be. Now, as I assessed that he was being truthful, and his answers showed that he wasn't a member of Al-Qaeda, although the information he did give frequently was of use to the CIA, legitimately. He had relevant information. It's not like we randomly chose someone. That's not the case at all. Nonetheless, I assessed he's not a member of Al-Qaeda. There are these questions I believe he could not answer, he would not answer, he's unable to answer. The relevant part of this story is I assessed he could not answer questions X and Y. And the assessment came back, the instruction response from headquarters came back to me, and this is literally true. They said, well, the fact that he is not answering proves that he is guilty. And I thought, well, that's not necessarily the case at all. That's just foolish. And I thought, well, I'm dealing with someone who's challenged at headquarters. But that was actually not the case. I wasn't dealing with a boob. I was dealing with formal doctrine. And I learned after I left the case that, in fact, the formal approach in our interrogations at that time was to inform, instruct the interrogators that the lack of response was proof of guilt and withholding information, and therefore you, Glenn Carle, or interrogator X or Y, must pressure him more. And this is just ludicrous, because if he answered correctly and provided useful information, that substantiated what we had assessed him to be and justified the fact that we kidnapped the guy. But if he couldn't answer the question, that was taken as proof of highly trained resistance techniques, and therefore we had to use stronger measures, it was a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. And my first objective was not to protect this man, but was to do right, and that just was foolish. I'm sorry to put it baldly, but I couldn't believe it. But that was in fact what happened. Then I was informed, okay, to help you pressure this man and get these last bits of information, we have rendered another senior member of Al-Qaeda who's intimately associated with your detainee. And you can use that to pressure your detainee. Well, that makes sense. However, they then said, you may not inform the detainee that we've rendered this second man. And I thought, well, what is the point? I said, that just makes no sense at all. I can understand pressuring him by showing that we're destroying his network or affecting his family or have a different perspective on information that he's trying to withhold. All of that's legitimate and sensible. But I was told, no, we've captured him so that you can pressure your detainee more, but you may not inform him, and this man's not providing any information you may use. That's literally the case. It makes no sense, and it sounds amusing, but it was profoundly disturbing. None of this made any sense, and I was concerned. I was as determined as anybody, everyone in the CIA was, any of you would have been, to try to protect American lives and destroy Al-Qaeda. Absolutely. It was an honor for me to be given the case at the beginning. But these things simply did not make sense and were rectifiable, but I could not get anything to change. So it became funny to talk about, and I would make black humor jokes with my colleagues, but it was deeply disturbing that we, in my assessment, had a man who wasn't what we had assessed him to be, who was on the whole cooperating, who had information that I could use in the interrogation that I was unable to obtain, that we possessed, and whose lack of knowledge of certain issues was taken as proof of guilt. I mean, on and on. It was much less issues of how to interrogate someone. Now, on the enhanced interrogation techniques, it's a term that didn't exist when I was involved at the time. I was told, and it was never do the following things. That's not how it happened at all. It was pressure him and be creative. And I, from the first second of the first discussion that I summarized for you, I just knew I would not do anything physical to the man. I simply wouldn't do it. It just was wrong. However, I will say, as I mentioned, I had been trained I had been interrogated, and I had been trained that the psychological dislocation was temporary and successful, and it did induce greater cooperation. So I thought, the experts have assured us that this works. And I know what it felt like. So if I'm disoriented for a day or two, but that makes it able for me to, with this fellow, to obtain information that can lead to bin Laden or something useful, I will accept that. I quickly found or decided that that's all wrong too. And I thought clearly about my own experiences 20 years earlier. And what had happened to me was shockingly quick psychological dislocation. It's very easy to break someone down, but that's not breaking someone. That's not making the person more willing to share information or more likely to necessarily at all. It makes you unhappy and angry and miserable, but none of those necessarily leads to greater cooperation. So I became as disturbed, frankly, by that supposed approach as I had been from the first second about anything physical related, and I simply refused to have anything to do with it. To the extent I had a circle of influence, I tried to stop all of these things as I was able to, but I was not able to entirely. So I found the measures are disturbing, they don't work, they are legally questionable. We have a man who was not what we had assessed him to be. Larger than all of those things, still, I started to question the premises and the assessments of our framework for the threat we were trying to parry. What was the nature of al-Qaeda and the jihadist threat? And I had initially accepted the conventional view which was that al-Qaeda and therefore jihad was centralized, global, there was command and control, growing worldwide, targeting the United States, and even possibly existential as a threat. In each of those points, as I came to know the issues firsthand, literally, through my case, and then subsequently, but I restrict my book to my perceptions at the time of the case, I found that each of those assessments is at heart wrong. That the threat is not pervasive, probably not dramatically growing, certainly not existential. Now, they kill thousands of Americans. They can kill more Americans. They are trying to. They probably will. This is a terrible thing. We must stop that. All of that is true. That's not an existential threat to the fabric of American society or the functioning of our government or our international relations and institutions. At its heyday, al-Qaeda, and this I did not know from my case, but it's relevant. At its heyday, which is when I was involved in the case, al-Qaeda was about 600 people, of whom all but, I would argue, 30 or 40 were essentially young men who were idealists with AK-47s. There were maybe 30 or 40 officers, you could call it, if you put it into a CIA or military terms, who were capable of planning, managing, and executing a terrorist operation. It only takes one person to kill thousands, possibly, but maybe 30 or 40. And the conventional assessment that was formally stated by the United States for many years that al-Qaeda was present in 80 countries. Six. Now, you define presence, and this is a somewhat different subject, but if they have people residing someplace planning operations, that's what I would say is the definition. The answer, therefore, is 6. Now, if they bought a train ticket in Grand Central Station to go to Long Island, 1, does that make the ticket taker complicit? I think not. And this was, I came to feel very broadly the situation of my detainee. And 2, does that mean that al-Qaeda is present and operating in the United States or has a node in Grand Central Station? I think that's a stretch too. And so I came to find that. So after weeks of wrestling with these things, I came to a number of conclusions, and I tried to have the man, I thought it was just totally wrong that our government detains someone on false assessments and destroy his life, whether he was, in our initial assessment, a terrorist or not. And I completely accept that we make errors. I make any number of errors every day, as anyone who's honest will acknowledge that they do. That's fine. But when there are lives involved, and it's your professional responsibility to try to get it right, and you can make things right, then you must. You must try, even if you're embarrassed by it, even if your policy suffers somewhat. It's just, I do not accept that we, frankly, sacrifice people's lives in order to cover up our errors. or to carry on with some broader goal if we can do something about it. So I thought, well, we should let this man go. And we should let the second man who was rendered go, who was captured so that I could pressure him without being informed that we had actually done it. And I recommended that, and I failed. The case carried on. My time ended, and I went on to other responsibilities. And I learned, actually, that he was held for 8 years and then released. I learned this long after I retired, actually. He was released with, I gather, this is secondhand, this is not firsthand, not from me, with a muted apology from the United States government, and that's, go off and lead your life. Which I find, frankly, substantiates, validates, corroborates, proves every point that I had made in the case 8 years before, but failed to have implemented. So that's the case, and it's a sad one and an important one, talking about issues of torture and rendition and our law. But it's the reason I wrote the book and I'm talking to you is much more important than that, I really believe. I think the policies I was involved in have affected all of you, as well as me, although this happened in a black site, out of sight, clandestinely, because it has made us as a society consciously coarser in the paradigm of what's acceptable behavior and how we define ourselves with respect to our laws and our comportment. From the schoolboy in New London, New Hampshire, where my brother lives, probably shouldn't have said that, to CIA officers at Langley, our attitudes have, without our knowing it often, shifted so that measures and practices that would have been dismissed as completely incompatible with American ideals and laws are now discussed, at the least, are now discussed as rational options and more frequently are accepted. And there's a poll, there are a number of polls. The Pew Institute has done polling in the last several months, and USA Today did a poll 2 months ago, I think, in the spring, that asked Americans about their attitudes toward torture. Americans 35 and above, a majority of them, this is simplifying, but generally this is the gist of the answers. Americans 35 and above, a majority say, well, of course, torture is incompatible with the United States. That's not what we are. That's not who we are. It is wrong. We don't do it. That's not what our flag represents. Americans 35 and below, a majority of them say, well, CIA officers and the people protecting us, if they need to, it's okay sometimes to do what you need to protect us. And I find that frightening. That's not the America that I think we believe that we live in. And the laws that we had were clear. The Convention Against Torture, which we largely helped write, is clear. The Geneva Conventions, which Eleanor Roosevelt wrote, are clear. The Uniform Code of Military Justice, the Executive Order 12333, the lawyers in the Justice Department, most of them, it was all clear what American ideals and obligations and practices should be. But none of them obtained. A small number of people subverted them, literally. I don't mean to be polemical. It is a fact. We were ordered, and it was legal because there was the executive order and the memoranda, to do things that were clearly incompatible with our ideals and our legal guidance. So to me, I think it's the gravest threat to our institutions and to our society's beliefs. The interrogation and detention program done out of sight of most people, but with the broad support of the American public, because we have to be protected and you guys are assigned to do it and you got to be tough against ruthless people. That's the rationale. That's the extent of the rationale. Because it shifted the bell curve of our attitudes and made us what we, I think, imagine ourselves not to be. And the law and the system of government have been usurped. Torture is now discussed as enhanced interrogation techniques. The euphemism has fallen, has replaced the clear understanding of the term. And that's not the America that I took an oath to preserve and protect, or that you, most of us, imagine that we live in. Even today, I think that is the case. And so I wrote the book because the only tool we have, the only weapon we have is the truth. The laws were there. Our oath was clear. But it's easy to usurp the laws when you are ordered to do so. And it's a terrible dilemma that I was in and that all of you would be in too. And that's the important thing to seize from this. When the President, the Attorney General, the Department of Justice, the Director of C.I.A., the Vice President, the Secretary of State, the Director of C.I.A., and the Director of the Counterterrorism Center all say this is legal, this is authorized, this is in the national interest, you are ordered to do it. And on the other hand, you have the equivalent of a Lieutenant Colonel. What do you do? It's an acute dilemma. So how do you make this right? You bear witness. I think only by knowing what we've done and understanding what we do the laws then have a chance of being fulfilled and made living, because they were there. So that's why I actually don't support prosecution of anybody. I think it would be even more divisive, and it wouldn't strengthen the laws. It would be perceived as an act of vengeance. And I'm not interested. I have bigger game I'm seeking. I want the American people, American society, to understand what we've done and to repudiate what we've done to ourselves and to embrace and strengthen our social contract, frankly, our commitment internally and then in our actions to the laws that we already had. The laws are there. So that way the U.S. legal system will apply wherever our flag holds sway. And that will be the flag that I serve. I start the book with, I think, its point. And it's slightly ambiguous, but it's the challenge we all face, and that I certainly consciously felt I faced in this operation, and that is why I hope you will read it and why I'm speaking to you today. This is our daily challenge, if we are honest about it, to accept doubt, to realize there is no certainty, and yet to act with principle, finding meaning and purpose in confusion. Inhabiting the gray world of intelligence with clear eyes has often fulfilled me, and then I was surged to become an interrogator in the global war on terror. I traveled to a far and dark place where I found the limits of human endurance, that zeal can blight integrity, and that a terrorist's life in my hands, with a terrorist's life in my hands, and perhaps the lives of many Americans in my hands. Alone, I had to decide how to fulfill my mission, what was legal, and what was right. And I came to the point, personally, where I tried to oppose the orders that I had received of an administration whose actions corrupted the flag that I had sworn to serve. Thank you.
Okay, well, I'm going to ask Glenn a couple of questions, and then we'll open it up to the floor. And when you do raise your hand, please state your name. We'll get a microphone to you, and then ask your question real clearly. Glenn, this was phenomenal. Thank you so much for telling your story, for bearing witness, and trying to force the conversation that I think we've not wanted to have in this town for political reasons, but that needs to happen so that we can move beyond this. We can be stronger from it. But until that day, I think we haven't learned the lessons. And I cited some in my opening remarks, but we have one of the most authoritative databases on drone strikes in the open source, and what we're extremely conscious of is that every day we're killing tens of low-level militants in Pakistan with a program that the U.S. does not recognize, is part of the C.I.A. Strike program, but is treading on very similar territory. And I just wanted to reaffirm that until we have those tough conversations that you're raising with us, that programs like that and the implications of those programs are not going to be treated with the attention that they deserve. And so I wanted to thank you for that. I first wanted to open up with a question broadly, that how have you, given that the Washington decided to move on and not have any kind of reckoning after the years of torture and the global war on terror, what kind of response have you received so far since you've published the book by the American people, in the media? How's the response been telling this story at this time?
Well, thank you. I assumed that the response was going to be a reflection of people's preconceptions, so that the people who think that, well, take the conventional political spectrum, people on the right would be hostile, people on the left would be hostile probably, people in the middle would be broadly supportive. On the left, I would be a torturer. On the right, I would be a traitor. And in the middle, people would say, well, I'm glad that you finally have spoken out. I found the responses that have reached me, either from reviews or people one way or another actually sending me some communication, have been overwhelmingly supportive. There have been a small percentage, it's hard to quantify, 5% maybe. 95% generally favorable, and 5% sort of the standard vituperative, attacks and so on. On the whole, supportive.
That's great. That's encouraging.
By the public. Not by the institutions.
Okay. What I'm going to do is open it up to the floor for questions, and then we'll have a back and forth, and it should be a little bit of fun. So where's our microphone? Jen's got it in the back. So gentleman here in the blue striped shirt up here in front, Jen. If you can state your name when the microphone comes. Thank you.
My name is Mike Hager, and recently retired. I'm on the over 35 category. I enjoyed your speech very much. I'm very moved by it. However, toward the end, when you indicated that prosecution would not be a suitable response, I wonder if you think that what other methods. What worries me is books like yours may be very few, and so that the impact in terms of actually drawing the proper line, getting us back to legal propriety, may not occur in time. Mm-hmm. And it occurs to me that we need something, and I wonder what you think about a truth commission as an alternative.
Thank you. Actually, in the book, I propose, in the last chapter, I step out of the narrative and say, well, what does all this mean? And I propose the equivalent of a truth commission, giving everyone immunity so that we know the facts, but we don't have any reticence or less reticence to speak, and there's no vindictive punishment perceived by anyone or so on. I think, I assume that would be a dead letter from the instant that it was written, and Congress has shown no interest in doing that. I wrote it to bear witness, so it's my effort to speak frankly. And when you read the book, if you do, you'll see I'm as truthful about everything in my life as can be, and that's important. There's honor in truth. There's not in lack thereof. I thought a long time about what we should do, and I had any number of specific historical precedents in mind. And my goal is not to protect the guilty, half flippant comment, but to strengthen our society, as I said. And I think one of our great triumphs in American history was at the end of the Civil War. 2% of the American public had just been massacred. The country was torn apart. Within 2 hours or 3 of the cessation of hostilities, General Johnston and General Sherman were literally playing poker on a riverboat together. In spite of the radical Republicans, the post-war history was very mild. There were very few people punished. Most people were immediately accepted back into the main fabric of the United States, most Southerners. I think that was one of the keys to American success historically. And Henry Kissinger wrote in his memoirs, a nation is great by its reconciliations, not by its vengeance. That's paraphrase. And I think that's wise too. So the goal to me is to change our society's assumptions and values, and I think that comes by moving ahead. I think the Obama administration on the whole is getting that part right, rather than focusing on the ills and the wrongs of predecessors, which will continue to have it be the hideously polarized situation that politics always is, but particularly at this moment. And if the cost to those who oppose enhanced interrogation is to let the half dozen people who wrote the legal guidance carry on with their lives, but the benefit is that society shifts away from it, I think that's a small price to pay.
Okay, thanks. Right here on this side, Jen.
Great, thanks very much. My name is Mark Stout. Fabulous talk, I really enjoyed it. Question for you. David Ignatius, I think it was, a few months ago, wrote an op-ed piece in which he basically said something along the lines of, gosh, isn't it ironic that given that we've been unable as a country to come to a way of handling detainees that we find politically, legally, and morally acceptable, that we've neatly solved this problem now by killing them, by dropping JDAMs and hellfires on their head. And I'm curious if A, you think that's a fair characterization of in fact what has happened, and B, if you think that's an improvement or not.
That's maybe the toughest question anyone's asked me, I think. I don't oppose, in principle, using drones for lethal strikes, but my opinion, I don't know how relevant it is to the reason I'm standing here. I think it's a little flippant. I think the world of David Ignatius, and he was kind enough to write a little blurb for my book, actually, but a little glib to characterize this as a replacement policy for the struggles of what to do with a detainee when you have one. These people are hard to get at, and I don't know if how low level they are. Actually, I think that the policy is distinct from what to do with detainees, and is not simply a decision, well, it's simpler to kill them than to figure out what to do with them. I think it's viewed more as a war, an act of war, than a replacement for rendition, I would hope.
Okay, on this side. Gentleman right there.
My name is Major Todd Pierce. I'm a U.S. Army JAG attorney. And I guess my question is, and first, my father was in the Bataan Death March. Following that, some of his captors had been prosecuted for war crimes, for waterboarding, among other crimes. In the Vietnam War, we prosecuted American service members for waterboarding, and we prosecuted them going back to the Philippine-American War. In addition, I've been doing some research recently on Nazi Germany, and many of the justifications that were provided for why the president could make these orders and hold himself above the law provided by the neoconservatives and whatnot are right out of the legal theories presented by Carl Schmitt,
Right out of
the
it.
Nazi legal theorist. So I guess my question first is, why should these people be given immunity from prosecution when they violate the law with impunity? And in fact, the harm is still continuing because we're still locked in a war. Some of the things that we're doing, according to Osama bin Laden, was exactly what he wanted to do in order to provoke more people in the Mideast to join with Al-Qaeda. So this problem isn't over with, and now we're just a matter of, with hindsight, decide that we don't want to do anything. But the problem is continuing and is being aggravated, some people would say, by the fact that these people were able to act with impunity and violating the Constitution, which, as I'm guessing you too, we don't take a oath to serve the flag. We take an oath to defend the Constitution.
That's right.
And there are people openly calling for setting the Constitution aside. Eric Posner refers specifically to Carl Schmitt and why we need to set the Constitution aside.
Yes.
So we're really dealing with some people who are openly calling for the abdication of our Constitution and to justify further acts such as what you described. So why should they not be prosecuted?
But if everyone didn't hear the question, I'm not sure if the microphone was on. The gist was, if we don't prosecute people, will we not be tacitly allowing people to do and get away with things that undermine the Constitution, which I argue we obviously want to strengthen as best we can. All of your points are powerful. I'm not 100% certain of how to move forward. I wrestle with, you want to hold people accountable with the versus the position that I suggest, which is the most important thing is to have us as a society repudiate these values, and it comes more from embracing good practices, which I think is more easy to do for people who have been ambiguous or supported the others, than to denounce the convictions and actions of a substantial section of society, I think. But that said, your points are very powerful, and I've wrestled with them. Friends and colleagues have made them too, and it is a hard thing to suggest that we allow American officials to justify explicitly their rationales and our actions upon what we had a war with 60 million dead to repudiate and to stop. They're very powerful points. It is shocking, and something I say in the book at the end, and no interviewer has really focused on it so far to my interest. I talk about torture and rendition and the law issues and getting the wrong man, all this, but I concluded that all of that was secondary to the fact that I was a clandestine tool for the de facto and de jure usurpation of the Constitution of the United States, which is the point that you're getting at, which is, well, we then must act to stop and to hold accountable people who do that. I mean, that's stunning for American officials and American society. Stunning, which is why I say it's the gravest crisis since World War II, at least. I don't say your approach is wrong. I wrestle with what's the right way. I embrace reconciliation in the hope that it will diminish the support for these egregious policies in the future, but I don't claim to know what the right answer is entirely.
Okay, right here, and then we'll take some in the back.
It's Gary Forber from the Epoch Times. I'm trying to kind of get a picture of your story, and I feel like I'm missing something. I don't have any background from where you came to all this. Could you just say something about your background, how you were raised, and your beliefs and that kind of thing? Then I'd have a better picture of who you are.
I won't give my whole autobiography, but it's quite relevant to the story, and you know, I'm hardly no person represents everybody, and I'm in many ways not an everyman, but the story is relevant because in this context I am. I think anyone would react similarly, and I will say before I answer in 2 paragraphs directly, the book, I hope readers will find, is not a partisan book. It starts, I took an oath to serve in the flag and the Constitution and to follow my orders and fulfill my mission. The agency is full of civil servants who are fundamentally apolitical. And you would come to the same reactions of concern, dismay, and conclusions, I think. So I wrote that. My background, I'm from New England. I'm a central casting New England Yankee. WASP, my ancestors go back to 1700. Most of them were loyalists, actually. One was actually convicted for spying against the Americans. He was a British spy. I went to Harvard. I went to Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, and I always wanted to be involved in public service and foreign affairs, and that leads you to the career I had in the agency. I think that addresses your question.
Great. Okay. Some in the back. The lady in the black shirt.
My name's Jessie Manistow, and I'm a Google Policy Fellow at the American Library Association. And I'm interested in whether you have any advice for someone who might be aspiring or entry-level intelligence professionals, operational officers, analysts, what have you, who want to do something in this field, or but also care about these concerns and don't want to contribute to that sort of thing. So.
Well, more than overwhelmingly, I was honored to serve with my colleagues. They're bright, dedicated people, not every single one. I mean, there's always a range of people, but it is an unusually committed, devoted group of people, which is stimulating to work with for your career. That's all true. The careers of an operations officer is wearing, though. The costs are high. The rewards are different. And I can talk offline about how to go about it. Often people ask me, would I do it again? And I hem and haw in my answer. The sacrifices are so great and the rewards are so unusual that it's hard for me to answer.
You know, in the military, there's a real ingraining of the UCMJ, the Uniform Court of Military Justice, and the Geneva Conventions. And is the training for young intelligence officers strong enough so that there are future lieutenant colonels who can say, no, I will not? Do you think we're there yet in terms of the quality of the training program?
Well, that gets to the point that I remember now that the gentleman in the front asked. I think the answer to your question is yes, but the agency was not in the business of interrogation. I am not an interrogator by profession. I'm an operations officer. My job is to find people who will spy for the United States. The skills that I need to do that job, I found, are almost identical to those that I concluded are required to be a good interrogator. But we are not interrogators. The training is accelerated today compared to 28 or 9 years ago when I went through it. The pressure of the war on terror to get people in the field has, I think, had unfortunate effects in shortening training. But the seriousness that we are trained, or the focus that is given to honoring your oath and giving it life, not to the spirit of your obligations, not just the letter of them, I think is quite strong. I think it's quite strong. None of us had any experience in, it was not our job. The whole business of interrogation and the Uniform Code of Military Justice is generally not relevant. It's not part of an intelligence officer's universe except in unusual circumstances until post 9/11. So the tools and perspective we had were targeted or framed for an entire different mission than the one that we were given.
Okay, back to the audience. The lady in back, the black and white.
My name is Li Yang. I appreciate your presentation, but I try to draw some comparisons with the abuse of power or authorities, or how do they have use of force, imprisonment or racial profiling, besides identify that person, whether it's guilty or not guilty. Actually, behind that, the hidden agenda is their rights, all kind of rights, constitutional rights, jury or litigation right, or their property, their home, their property, or their car assets has been robbed by what we call somebody behind the
scene. Do you have a question, ma'am?
My question will be, do you have any information, or do you try to attempt to find some studies to address this type of issues?
Well, what comes to mind, I think, is directly relevant is one of the polemics and key debates in how do we conduct interrogations and what is the responsibility of the intelligence community and the military and law enforcement in the war on terror, going after to protect us after terrorists or to identify them. And the 1% doctrine of Vice President Cheney became the operative guidance for many of us in each of the institutions I mentioned, which was that if there's any possibility at all that someone is guilty, you will treat him as such. And this is such a wildly expansive approach that it can justify any action against any person, and it becomes 1984. I mean, it's quite shocking, really. And it's an error in a practical sense to say, well, there might be a mushroom cloud, so we have to inspect every car coming into Manhattan. Because one does not write a law or develop a doctrine, whether it's as an intelligence officer or the military, I would imagine, on the one theoretical example that's 10 standard deviations from the norm. that might happen one time out of 10 million. What you do is you develop your doctrine on the 9,999,999 more likely cases, which do not call for stopping every car that comes in, even if the theoretical harm would be a mushroom cloud destroying Manhattan. You have to make some critical judgments and not be absolutist. And the likelihood of these things happening does not justify subverting the laws and the guarantees for individuals and legal practices, whether in law enforcement or in intelligence work.
Okay, let's gather 2 more questions, and then we'll wrap up. So right here, and then who's right there?
My name is Lincoln Day. I'm a retired sociologist, and I certainly found what you had to say very moving, and I certainly share your value system as far as I can tell what it is from your talk, which is really important. But I wish I could share your hope. Maybe it's because I'm an octogenarian, but I can remember not only Pearl Harbor, but I can remember the dropping of not 1 but 2 atomic bombs with the full knowledge that literally tens of thousands would be immediately killed. You're talking about the 2 generals, the Union general and the Confederate general, getting together 2 days afterwards. Sort of tipped this off. They were the same crowd. They spoke the same language, they had the same religion, they had the same color. One group took it out later on the blacks during the period of Reconstruction, and all the other people on whom the United States has used torture have been people like Filipinos, Vietnamese, Asians, Africans, and so on. And I just wonder, is it too much for us to hope that we can get beyond this and stop torturing not only our so-called enemies, but just our people who are different?
2 parts to that. I think it has taken us 150 years to overcome, to achieve the goals that came to be the goals in the Civil War, so that's a depressing thought. But I think things may have been dramatically worse had the North been vindictive and punished people more directly. We would have then had probably a guerrilla war and even more division and been worse off today than we are. I do think, I didn't put it in the book really, but I suspect if the man I interrogated looked like I do and came from the north of England where my wife comes from, that he wouldn't have been detained for 8 years.
Okay, final question here in the white shirt.
Hi, my name is Rob Dubois. Patrick, I emailed you a couple of days ago on the old seal that I was emailing about getting over here. And Glenn, you and I spoke out here
I remember.
a couple of months ago about our pending books.
Right, I remember.
And you beat me to the release. I write the blog at powerfulpeace.net, peacemaking from a seal. You made a comment about how the arbitrary release of him with a murmured apology validated your points over the years. And I think you have another book pending in the unspoken validation of Al-Qaeda's rhetoric at this murmuring apology after destroying a man's life. When I was at Abu Ghraib, we had guys in there for 6 months who were innocent. That was the early release program. If you finally validated the guy's releasability, you got him back to his family. By then, his wife's a prostitute, his children are somebody else's family, and so forth. And I'm a deep patriot. I love our country very much too. But what do you have comments? Have you spoken to it in the book? I've only just bought it. About the incredible firepower for our enemies to use our own facts of reality, because Bob Gates said, are we creating more terrorists than we're killing?
Well, everything we've done has, I focused in my discussion today, and is the focus of my book, on what we've done to ourselves, our values and our assumptions with respect to our laws and how whether we jaywalk or pay our taxes or accept torture. I mean, truly, that sort of thing. Your point on what we've done to ourselves with respect to foreign societies and individuals' perceptions of America is also an important one. and an easier one to grasp, I think, than mine, which is trying to get us to be aware of our assumptions and our comportment. But certainly, it will be, others have said eloquently before me that the photos of Abu Ghraib and what we did in Abu Ghraib, and I think what we've done with my fellow, happily nothing hideous like that happened to my gentleman. And the CIA didn't do Abu Ghraib kind of things. Nonetheless, the effects are disastrous for America's reputation and standing in the world. And one would hope we'd realize that it's not, for all of the spectacular qualities and capabilities of our armed forces, it's not they who win the hearts and minds, which is the ultimate objective, frankly. I don't want to sound like a Vietnamese, an officer in the Vietnam War, but we've undermined ourselves for a decade. And I'm in no way a pacifist, and I enthusiastically embrace many of our counterterrorism policies. There are bad people whom we should oppose vigorously.
Okay. With that, help me thank Glenn Carle, and Glenn's going to be available afterwards.
Thank you. Thank you.